Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue with the Warriors Corner. At this time, please give a warm welcome from Lieutenant General Edward Cardon and Mr. Robert Swan from the Office of Business Transformation.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm really excited to be here on one of my favorite subjects, which is innovation. So I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Swan for the rest, and we're really looking forward to your questions. But let me start with building off of General Milley's speech here at the Eisenhower Luncheon, which is he talked about overmatch and competitive advantage. We're slowly losing our overmatch, and we're losing our competitive advantage, becoming outgunned, outranged, etc. A lot of our vehicles are great vehicles, but as the Secretary said, the law of diminishing returns. When you think about that, so what does that mean? That means that over time, the readiness will degrade if we don't do something. But there is something we can do, which is innovation. And I divide innovation into two parts. I call it incremental innovation and disruptive innovation. Incremental innovation is what we've been doing for a long time. In other words, our 5 combat platforms that the Secretary talked about this morning, those look nothing like they did in 1980. Nothing like it. Very capable. However, what about the disruptive innovation? Disruptive innovation would be, for example, a 10 times rifle. What does that mean? 10 times the stopping power, 10 times the range, 10 times the ammunition. What if it's not a rifle at all? What if it is, take the fire control that exists on aviation and ground platforms, put that on the soldier, and the weapons lose automatically to the targets? A completely different way of thinking. That's just, to me, that's disruptive innovation. The Army has always been a very innovative organization. If you just look at the inventions that came out of the wars, and we have some World War I photos, World War II, when you think about the innovations in the wars, they've been quite stunning. So if you just think about the Army, roughly 1.1 million soldiers, 240,000 civilians, all with great ideas, how do you organize all this innovation? How do we do that? Because there is a lot that comes from the bottom as you face problems each and every day. At the same time, when you look at what's going on inside this very auditorium, there's a lot of innovation in industry. And there's a lot of innovation that goes on in academia. How do we put all of that together? And that's what Robin Swan's going to talk about. So, Robin, over to you.
Hey, sir, thank you. Whoa, this is loud. Hey, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I was downstairs earlier this morning. I walked around A, B, and C downstairs, the exhibit halls, and I started to count the times that I saw the word innovation on a sign from one of the displays. I stopped counting at 34. So I have to ask the question, innovation that critical? General Cardon just said we are intuitively and by culture a tremendously innovative lot. Why has it taken till 2017 for us to provide strategic direction for innovation? So a year and a half ago, the Secretary and the Chief were identified to go to one of the Secretary of Defense's senior leader conferences, and you know that the Secretary of Defense at the time was very keen on innovation, and he was trying to drive, he did DIUX, he did a range of other activity associated with driving innovation into the joint fight, and they were to talk, the Chief and the Secretary, on what the Army was doing from the innovation front. And here's how this sort of kind of played during the Senior Leader Conference. So the United States Navy stood up. They were first, and here is our innovation strategy. Here is a nice colored Excel spreadsheet on everything that we're doing. Here is our Hatch program for ideas that translate seaman ideas into action. And isn't this wonderful? And we're a very innovative lot. Second was the United States Air Force, and it was a dramatic replay of exactly what the Navy did. And for our presentation, there was absolutely nothing at the table. And in fact, the Chief and the Secretary were armed with nothing other than an information paper that resulted from a late night, Friday night, 1700 request out to the command saying, what are you doing innovative? Right? So in fact, whenever we started to think about innovation from the perspective of a strategic approach, we took that information of the innovative things that we were doing, TRADOC and AMC at the time had a series of innovation conferences. We went down and listened to the innovation conference, and we determined from the Office of Business Transformation, you know, we are doing a lot of innovation. Let's find out what strategic direction the United States Army has for it. And so we did a series of literature scrubs trying to find innovation from a strategic perspective. And the only thing, ladies and gentlemen, that we could find was one paragraph, one sentence within that paragraph in the Army operating concept for 2025, which basically said we have to embrace innovation. And so as we think about innovation, just by a show of hands, and in here, you think about it, do we normally, usually, almost always associate innovation with some material capability to overcome a problem? If you think that that's the case, restricting innovation to material solutions, raise your hand. I'm just interested in the audience participation. Material solution, right? Well, I would say by and large that's the way that the United States Army approaches it as well, right? We think about materiel, the next best thing to put in the hands of a soldier to be able to deliver a kinetic or non-kinetic effect on the enemy. But from a perspective of strategic direction, isn't it really appropriate for innovation to occur across all of the .mil PF domains? Right? Can there be innovation in leader development? Can there be innovation in doctrine and doctrine preparation? How about organizational structures? So as we take a look at innovation from a strategic perspective, trying to wrap our arms around all of that, we came back and said from that TRADOC conference and AMC conference, you know, we really need to probably provide some level of authoritative strategic direction for the Army as an institution to embrace .mil PF approaches to innovation. So we started to try to frame what an innovation strategy would look like. And oh, by the way, I wanted to mention, we're one of the few presenters today wherein you are not reading a PowerPoint chart. I just wanted you to recognize that. So we took a look at academia, we took a look at industry best practice. In fact, we went out and talked to a couple of companies, actually a couple of them are in bursting radius of right here, and how do those, from a best practice perspective in civilian industry, how do you embrace innovation and how do you create this culture of innovation within your organizations? And we talked to the University of Pennsylvania and a couple of others. And the unifying thread was a framework that is built on three basic components. First and foremost is you have to have a suite of innovation tools. And by that what I mean is I can have the best idea in the world, but if I cannot share that idea with a decision maker at some point in time, that idea will die on the vine and nothing will happen from it. So in 2017, how do we have the tools available to surface ideas, discuss ideas, drive ideas inside labs in the experimentation of training and elsewhere to be able to see what works, what doesn't work? So if you get a chance after the discussion today, little booth right over there, the Army Ideas for Innovation program is one of those activities associated with innovation tools, one of the three components of our strategy. The second is, how do you manage for innovation? And by that, what we mean is, from managing not only the institution from an entrepreneurial perspective, but also from a talent management perspective, from the standpoint of a reward system to be able to reward innovators who take risks to be able to move those kinds of things forward. How do you manage innovation from an institutional perspective? And then the last, third component, and this one is really highlighted from both academia, from our own internal thought processes too in our culture, is you need leadership. Leadership to be able, top down, to be able to enable innovation bottom up. And so those three pillars, innovation tools, an entrepreneurial management structure, and a leadership structure that fosters a culture of innovation, are the foundations of the innovation strategy. So then what we took, and we wanted to follow our own Army doctrine associated with trying to frame the innovation strategy. And so what we did was go out to practitioners across the Army labs, across AMC, all of the Army commands, including TRADOC, AMC, Forces Command, some interested folks inside the Army staff, and we reached out to RAND and others, and we held a framing session. and we used the operational design approach to be able to frame our innovation environment inside the United States Army. From that framing, we identified a range of challenges, and then from there, the strategy wrote itself. And what I wanted to talk to you about for the remainder of my short time here is the 5 key challenges that we identified associated with the innovation strategy. First and foremost is we have a risk-averse culture. Now, as much as we want perhaps to say otherwise, the United States Army does not prize failure. So if we don't prize failure, think about a program manager. A program manager isn't rewarded, for example, for delivering a failed program, is he or she, right? We don't like to embrace the idea of fail fast so we can learn from it and move on to the next best thing. So as a cultural component of this, we have to think about risk aversion from the standpoint of enabling innovation and rewarding innovation even if it leads to a failed attempt. The second thing, and it's interesting with some of the familiar faces in the crowd, is that we do not fund innovation by and large. Now, I'm not talking about the S&T budget or the RDT&E budget inside the Army program or in the BES. What am I talking about? Well, do I have a portion as a commander, as an Army commander or an Army Service Component commander to say, you know, I'm going to set this portion of my budget aside. I'm going to be able to fund based off of ideas. I'm going to fund that, and regardless of whether or not that idea brings about any changed capability. And I would venture to say that if any ACOM commander or ASCC commander came into the building and said, I want a portion of my yearly budget to be able to do that, they would probably find a hard time and not too familiar of ears. So the idea is to be able to overcome that challenge, is to be able to provide flexible funding to be able to rapidly fund good ideas, whether or not they pan out, learn from those ideas, and build upon the next best idea. The third has to do with this notion of entrepreneurial management and orienting the institution and aligning the institution, both military and civilian in particular, because innovation is all about the intellectual capacity of the force. How do we align talent management? How do we align reward structures to be able to foster innovative approaches? Are there specific career fields that we should invest more in? Are there experimentation venues that we should be investing more in? Those kinds of things from a management perspective. The fourth component, of course, is leadership. And this gets back not only from strong central leadership top down to encourage and have flourish innovation bottom up, but the leadership that has the vision, as General Cardon mentioned, to be able to identify the next best or the next disruptive technology and identify that that may have some level of utility on a future battlefield, and that that particular capability should be husbanded and examined in greater detail from an experiential standpoint. So this whole management and the leadership aspect, very strong central management and central leadership to be able to drive this culture of innovation. And fifth and final, before we take questions, and this one is kind of an interesting one. Innovation in and of itself is wonderful. But I could come up with a great idea that has no strategic relevance for the United States Army. So perhaps focusing innovation on a range of topics that have strategic outcomes so that we can apply scarce resources for the largest potential strategic outcome possible. Now, in a nutshell, I gave you the 3 pillars of the innovation strategy, the organizing framework around which it was built. I gave you the 5 challenges that was associated with it. Many of you have a copy of the trifold that has the website where you can find the innovation strategy. If you don't have that and you want to see a copy of it, robin.p.swan.mil or .civ@mail.mil, pretty simple. And for those in the military or civilians, I'm on the global. And with that, with General Cardon, we're ready to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Testing. Okay. General
Okay.
Cardon, beat Navy. Okay, a couple of questions here. How much is innovation inhibited by the DoD acquisition system? I know there's DUIX and C5. Be interested to know how you feel they're doing, helping to break through that. And then how are some of these efforts aligning with what DARPA is doing? Any thoughts there?
So first, I think, so DDS, DIUX, I'm using all these acronyms. Okay, let me start here. Defense Digital Service, Defense Innovation Unit, Experimental, Strategic Capabilities Office, DARPA. There are a number of innovative programs in place. I would, right now, Carrie, I'd say they're very loosely stitched together. I would say we have done some things. So, for example, with DDS, we have done 2 projects just in our own office, and they're always looking for a problem to solve. The Army decided we need to scale this, so we have created a Defense Digital Service Army to work on Army problems. So how do I think they're working? I think they're all working, but I think they're probably on year 1 or 2 of 10, right? And so we're learning a lot about how exactly do you do this? I do think the Congress has helped us a lot, though, with the change in other transaction authorities, the encouragement of rapid prototyping, experimental prototyping. We're being encouraged to do a lot of this. In fact, today when the Secretary talked about acquisition reform, I believe when we started, we said a lot of the acquisition reform, 95% of it has to happen within the Army itself. It's actually, we're not hindered as much as we think by the acquisition process. It's our interpretation of how we implement that process. And so I guess I'll probably say from that point there, tighter coordination with these innovative cells, but those innovative cells over time should be eaten by our own our organizations should act like these cells, right? They show us what's possible, and then you got to ask yourself, why can't a PM shop operate like DIUX? Why can't our information technologies operate like DDS? Now, they have some special authorities, but a lot of it is not special. For example, DIUX, here's a great news story. I asked Raj, who heads up the organization, Raj, who does your contracting? He goes, Army Contracting Command. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, it's great. I get my contracts in 30, 45 days. Really? I had no idea, because normally we think they have some special contracting cell of it. It's the Army doing it. We just don't know. And so I think there's, right now, I view every time those things happen, it's advancing the ball, and we're starting to get some pretty good momentum.
General Robin, thank you for your comments. Very informative. It was interesting you mentioned innovation with respect to organizational structure. We're from University of Texas at Arlington. We're part of ARL South. And when I look at the ARL South and West and North concept, I think that's innovative because they're bringing talent and brains to the Army from people that would never move to Aberdeen or Adelphi. So I congratulate you on that, and I'd like to hear about your plans for that concept in the future.
I think that was also identified during the TRADOC AMC conference. In fact, that's where I may have met you if you were at that conference down at William and Mary. I think that is a tremendous construct, and in particular the ability to continue to partner and identify collaborative approaches with academia. It's interesting right now. We have General Cardon and I have there is an Army fellow at the 06 level who is currently out at Kellogg School of Business, and he is trying to drive back into the department a collaborative approach associated with data analytics. And so we sent a copy of our emerging data strategy out and asked Kellogg folks to be able to take a look at it and be able to identify some collaborative approaches associated with data analytics moving forward, because that is a wide open field for innovation here in the United States Army, by the way. So this notion of teaming with academia in particular has some tremendous potential moving forward.
The way I'll build on that is, this comes out of my former job I was in Cyber Command, is sometimes you have to move to the talent. The talent doesn't move to you. But we're not comfortable generally, like we want control. But already all the tech companies have figured this out, right? And they're distributing themselves to where they can work the talent. And I think we're going to have to do some of that inside the Army, and I think ARL is leading the way in this. Right here.
Gentlemen, thanks for your time today. I do think some of the tech companies have figured it out, and we used to talk about people, process, and technology. The technology works, so now some of us say it's people, process, and change management. So maybe thoughts on how do you do that through the .mil PF construct?
Want to take it, or I can start?
I have become a big fan of change management. And by that, what I mean is, look, we live in the business space, right? General Cardon and I, Mr. Schneider, we live in the business space. We spend $2.4 billion a year on business systems and information technology. The crown jewels of our information technology universe are the 4 enterprise resource planning systems that we have. Those things are, and if Gartner were here, they'd say we're in the midst of the modern ERP era, right? We have a core of enterprise resource planning systems. They're organized by line of business, and they help us drive the enterprise business, right? And yet, just foisting a new financial management system or a new personnel management system or a new logistics system on the United States Army is not a simple thing. Just like bringing a new piece of equipment into the hands of a soldier is not an easy thing. .mil PF integration through change management is a critical component of being successful or not. And you can take a look at the history of failed ERP deployments and point to 2 things. Number 1 is the workforce didn't buy into the new system. And number 2 is they weren't trained on it, right? Both of those are functions of change management. So for an innovative idea, regardless of where it is, across .mil PF integration, without that change management to integrate those .mil PF domains, because let's face it, that's exactly how the United States Army embraces force development, is it not? And so without a dedicated approach and continued dedicated approaches to that .mil PF integration, most innovative idea will never come to fruition if the Army has decided to take that innovative idea and move it into an extant capability.
Robin, talk about IPSA real quick talk about IPSA.
Yeah, General Cardon wanted me to talk about the business process reengineering associated with IPSA. So for those of you that may live in the business IT world, you know that one way to ensure that your program goes over cost and schedule and probably performance is not to change your existing processes but customize the IT, right? Right? Sure way to break the bank and ensure your failure. So, United States Army, to some degree, guilty. But the interesting thing about the United States Army is we always learn. And what the first ERP deployment did isn't what the last ERP deployment did. So for integrated pay and personnel system, for example, we took a PeopleSoft product and we said and got the PeopleSoft engineers in and said, what are the range of business processes inside PeopleSoft relative to the 154 human resource processes that we have that generate orders, that generate pay, that generate promotions, and all of those kinds of things? And how can we re-engineer those existing Army processes to meet the capability of PeopleSoft out of the box? And so we got together and over the course of several months took a look at each one of those particular end-to-end processes, and we went from 154 existing Army engineered processes down to 30 that were supported by the PeopleSoft product. Here's just one example of that re-engineering that takes place. For those of you that have served in the military, it's a DD form, so that's good. Or I think it's a DD, maybe it's a DA form, 31, right? Leave form. That leave form has 2 separate lines of business transactions in it, right? One of them is a personnel transaction. Yep, soldiers on leave. The other is the financial transaction. This is 2017, ladies and gentlemen. How many process steps do you think are in the processing of that one DA 31 for one of our soldiers? How many? Any guesses? I'll help you. 23. And they're all manual. All manual. This is 2017. So whomever comes up with the idea that says, hey, you know what? And I got to give credit to the PM here for this, right? I can not only get that down to maybe 2 manual processes. Yeah, the commander has to actually say, I approve your leave. But why do I have to, as a soldier, show up at the staff duty desk anymore? Why can't I have my handheld and just sign out of leave on my handheld, and automatically that entire transaction flows through the system and the soldier never touches it, right? So that's another example.
So the only thing I want to add, the only reason that happened is because of the G1 of the Army and Mr. Snyder at the time and others drove that from the top. In other words, they said we weren't going to do it that way anymore, and they started adapting the workforce, got the processes changed, et cetera. So I agree with you. I mean, change management is a huge part of this.
Anything else?
A couple over here. They just want to watch you go back and forth.
General, Mr. Swan, thank you so much for joining us. Just being a former Army officer and having goals that I had to attain and had targets to be successful, what are your thoughts on how do you measure innovation, and what are your thoughts on what are their success criteria? Because we have to have a goal. We have to achieve. Or do we need to be innovative as far as what success looks like?
Well, I kind of do. I do a little different. Well, you go ahead and start, and I'll pile on how I normally start.
I just have two interesting things, right? So Jen Moots, in fact, is standing back there in the red sweater. Jen is instrumental in help crafting the strategy. And so Jen and I were on a conversation. We talked to one of the professors up at the University of Pennsylvania one day. And he was talking about innovation, and he turned around and he asked us a very simple question. He said, well, what is your innovation capital structure? And here Robin Swan was thinking, well, what do you mean? Whenever somebody comes up with a great idea, how much money do we give them, right? And so that was my reply, and he said, that's your problem, right? Because you're looking at and realize that there are other forms of recognition that are outside of that capital structure. And then, and money isn't only one of them, right? So think about today, as I was listening to the chief and at the start of the Eisenhower dinner, or the luncheon. What would be wrong, say perhaps not at the Eisenhower luncheon, but you think maybe at the Army birthday ball or whatever, the number one innovation of the United States Army is recognized during the Army birthday ball, as an example, right? A form of capital recognition. The second portion of that dialogue that I had with him was this long discussion Jen and I had about how do you know if you're innovative or not? How do you, and to his point, it is one of the most difficult things to assess. So what do you have to assess? You have to assess all of those things that you want to embrace from an institution to see if you are driving the culture of innovation. So are you embracing this notion of risk aversion? Are you embracing, and that's a binary, right? You can say yes or no, right? Are you embracing this issue of entrepreneurial management? Do you have the tools in place to be able to inhibit the dialogue and crowdsource? So not a question necessarily of are you innovative or not, yes or no. Have you established the foundation within which a culture of innovation could reside? And those are easier to measure. And on a maturity model, I think that any maturity model from academia would say get after those first.
So today at the congressional breakfast, the secretary talked about the bad habits we're getting into. And so one of them is it's on budgets, right? So if you think about it, a lot of innovation inside the department, if you said innovation, you know what most people actually start with? How much am I getting cut? That's the way they start. What's interesting is it's unintended behaviors, right? Because what happens is, to me, I use this example as let's say I'm still the 2ID commander, and I get this thing that says, you have to save 5%. I hand that off to the G8, figure out how to get, 5%, come back to me, I'll make some decisions. But rarely do we go down and say, hey, is there a way that we could do this much differently than we do it today. Might cost a little money, but in the end, we'll get 20, 30, 50%. That's the part that Secretary Shanahan right now in the Department of Defense, that's what he's trying to drive. He comes out of the commercial space, and the first thing that happens is like, well, we want to get like 5% savings, maybe off service contract acquisition, and the first thing he says, well, that's a 5% cut. That's not what he's after at all. He's like, do you think maybe we could do some of this differently? Do we really have to have 25 contracts of the same thing with a widely varying cost structure? And so that's on the business side, which I'm more familiar with. Go to the combat zones, it's very easy to measure. You know, when I was brigade commander in Iraq, right, you measure it in human life, right? Didn't take long. First EFP, those soldiers welded those things on the front, right, had those things in there. Started with charcoal, then we used spark plugs, and then finally the Army caught up with it. But, you know, they are extremely innovative, you know, when it's your personal safety or your friend's personal safety in thing, and then the Army adapts really fast to that. So I actually believe this is one of the hardest things because innovation up to this point has sort of been measured in terms of how much money can we innovate because we want to save money. What did the chief say? He didn't say save money. He said improve lethality, overmatch, competitive advantage. That's different, and we have to change that from the senior leader on down. Yes, sir.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate all your comments about innovation and money because 2 years with the Marine Corps at Quantico, they were fiscally constrained and innovative by design. They really appreciated and cherished cultural outside-the-box thinking. So the question is, if we were going to stand up, say, a modernization sort of organization, how do we make sure that there's cultural space for the innovation at the same time as using money to drive innovative products, ideas, solutions?
So I know some people are, and also some people, like half the people are laughing in here because, so did you ask that deliberately of me because you know what I'm working on? So no. So I'll go back to my cyber command experience, right? So the first thing, you have to create space for innovation. And what I mean by that is I quickly learned, so first for the rest of you, I'm a hard engineer, like a civil engineer. And now I'm in cyberspace, so it was quite a growth curve for me, and I had a lot of help. But it didn't take me long to pick up on this and to work on the operationalization of this. But I quickly learned that the way that we teach, you know, young combat engineers and young infantrymen and the use of cyber, that's not a good mix. That doesn't work like that, right? Because what do? We train our officers, our leaders, to basically be the most knowledgeable, right? And then they tell people what to do. And that works well in the environments in which that is needed, right? And you just watch, you know, The Longest Day with the torpedo. We want that, right? But that's not how it works in the cyber world, right? In the cyber world, it's more, first off, the leader probably doesn't know as much as the people he's leading, or certainly in certain areas. And so you kind of have to put the problem on the table and say, this is our problem. How are we going to solve it? And step back and let the magic happen, as I say. Which then becomes, back to somebody's question here, who do you put in charge? And you have to get the right leaders that can make the right calls to allow that environment to happen. And if you don't have that, what I found happen is your talent leaves, right? Because they all have options in the cyber world. So it is to me, it's very much the culture and the leadership on top that has a lot to do with how innovative organizations are. And I shouldn't say always the leadership on top, because I bet if you ask most of the General Officer Corps, in fact, I know this, they'll say that they think they're very innovative. You know, this gets to what I call sometimes the middle layer. The middle layer, which doesn't really know, and often, you know, stuff gets trapped in the middle. We all live in these hierarchical organizations. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Once you can figure out how to incentivize that middle layer for innovation, unleashes the power of the organization. And I strongly believe that this is the way we're going to have to go forward. But to me, the key for modernization is projects with the right leader. This is actually a DARPA model, right? They They work on specific problems. You put a leader against that problem, let he or she pick the team that they need, get the network they need, and drive to a point where we can say, make decisions as senior leaders. And if that's not working, then, you know, adjust the team, get a different leader, got the wrong problem, but don't take forever making that decision. One more?
Colin Clark, Breaking Defense. General, sir, you guys for a long time have had a lot of very smart engineers in the Army and a lot of smart leaders trying to buy new gear, and you're still basically operating with the big five. You've got a new modernization process, but you say that leadership is the key. Why don't you restructure your program management system so that it's not a dead-end career for someone in uniform? I mean, if I were an Army guy, I would not want to be a PM.
That would be organizational innovation. I'll put it like this. I have 120 days to provide recommendations to the Secretary of the Army, and, you know, I take your comment. Well, what the Secretary said is take a look at the whole thing. Come back to me with recommendations. You have 120 days. And he's been very clear on the priorities that he wants to operate against, the cross-functional teams he wants to get in place. And you can see the timeline that he mentioned. It's quite aggressive. And it's not going to be a normal, let's look at this and study this. It's going to be rapidly moving.
And I think that's it for today. We want to thank all of you for your attention. Thanks for coming, and thanks for listening about the innovation strategy. If you want more information, see Jen Moots right there in the red sweater and the red scarf again. She has some brochures on it. Okay? Thank you.